You ever make a promise, like a really important one, and you can just feel the weight of your words hanging in the air? Maybe it's to a child, one of those pinky swear can't break 'em kind of deals.
Oh, I know those promises. They come with laser beam eyes and a whole lot of accountability.
Exactly. But it makes you think about why we put so much stock in promises. What makes them more than just, like, empty words?
Well, that's what we're diving into today. The whole idea of promises, their significance, why they matter, even when it's tempting to just, let things slide.
Right, because let's be honest, keeping promises isn't always easy, is it?
Mm.
Especially in a world where things change so fast, commitments can feel fluid. So today, we're looking at this from, well, kind of an interesting angle.
From casual promises to, shall we say, divine
You
commitments.
got it. We're exploring thickshades.com, reflecting on the importance of promises. They get into both the human and the, well, let's say the ultimate promise keeper side of things.
Always a good source of wisdom, that's for sure. And this source doesn't hold back. It contrasts how casually we tend to view promises in today's world with what it calls the biblical perspective.
Yeah, they make it clear that in a biblical context, a promise isn't just a casual agreement. It's like deeply binding.
Exactly. This is where we get into the whole concept of a covenant. It's not just, hey, let's shake on it. It's a sacred pact, often sealed with rituals or oaths, signifying a bond that goes way deeper than a handshake.
So it's like a big deal, right? Not just, oh, I forgot to pick up the dry cleaning. We're talking serious commitments.
Think of it as the ancient world's version of a legally binding contract, but with this added layer of spiritual weight. And this idea of a covenant, it's central to understanding how promises function in a biblical worldview.
Okay, so I can see where this is going. We're talking about God's covenants, right?
Right.
Like the big ones, Noah's Ark, Abraham's descendants, that whole epic scope.
You got it. The source dives right into that, highlighting God's covenant with Noah after the flood. I mean, talk about a promise with consequences. It literally reshaped the world as we know it.
Right. I mean, it doesn't get much more concrete than that. But what really struck me was this idea that God's faithfulness to his promises, it's not just some nice-to-have quality. It's fundamental to his character.
Exactly. The source really hammers this home. God, the creator of the universe, is bound by his own word. His faithfulness isn't just an attribute, it's the very essence of who he is.
And it's like, if God's all about truth, then his promises, they've got to be rock solid. Otherwise, the whole thing kind of falls apart.
It's foundational. It's the bedrock of faith, the idea that you can rely on God's word no matter what. And that's a powerful concept to grasp.
It's huge. And speaking of powerful concepts, the source brings up a verse that I think perfectly captures this idea, Numbers 23.19. God is not a man that he should lie.
That right there is a mic drop statement. It cuts through all the noise and establishes the unwavering truthfulness of God's word.
It's like case closed, right? Right? If we're looking for guarantees in life, well, there it is.
It's not just about what he says, but who he is. It's this unshakable integrity that underpins everything, and it's woven throughout the entire biblical narrative.
Which brings us to one of the most mind-blowing promises of all time. The one hinted at way back in Genesis after, well, the whole Apple incident. The promise of a redeemer.
Ah, yes. The proto-evangelium, tucked away in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, a glimmer of hope in the midst of humanity's colossal mess-up.
And not just a glimmer, right? It's a promise that finds its fulfillment centuries later in the person of Jesus. Talk about playing the long game.
Talk about keeping your word, even when it takes, a few thousand years. This promise, hidden in the garden, whispered amidst the chaos of the fall, it points towards God's faithfulness, his unwavering commitment to his people.
Okay, so we've established that God's promise-keeping game is, like, on a whole other level. But it does make you wonder, where does that leave us regular folks? With our messy lives and, let's be honest, less than perfect track records when it comes to always keeping our word.
Right, because we've all been there, haven't we? That moment when you realize, I don't think I can actually deliver on that promise I made. Life happens. Circumstances change. And sometimes we just plain fall short.
Stuff happens. That's what the source calls it. And I appreciate that honesty because it feels more, I don't know, relatable. Like, it's not about pretending we could be perfect promise keepers, but more about how do we navigate that tension between our good intentions and our human limitations.
It's about acknowledging that, we're going to mess up sometimes. We're not God. We don't have infinite wisdom or power. But here's the thing. That doesn't give us a free pass to just abandon the whole idea of keeping our promises.
So it's not about lowering the bar, right?
Yeah.
It's still important to strive for that integrity, even if we know we won't always hit the mark.
Absolutely. The source is very clear on that. It's not about letting ourselves off the hook, but about recognizing that we're works in progress. And that progress involves recognizing the value of a promise, even when it's tough to keep.
It's like that saying, do the best you can until you know better.
Yeah.
Then when you know better, do better. So when it comes to promises, how do we do better even when it's hard?
Well, the source points us to a powerful verse in Psalm 15.4. It describes a righteous person as someone who swears to his own hurt and changes not, meaning they keep their word even when it's difficult, even if it costs them something.
Oof, that's a tough one. Because let's be real, it's easy to keep a promise when it's convenient, when it doesn't require much sacrifice. But it's those moments when it's hard, when we have to choose between our comfort and our integrity that really test our character.
Think about a time when you kept a promise, even though it would have been easier to break it. Maybe it cost you time or money or even a relationship. How did it feel to stay true to your word, even when it was challenging?
I don't know, there's a certain sense of, I don't know, self-respect that comes with that.
Mhm.
Like you've proven something to yourself, even if no one else notices.
It's that inner compass, that alignment between your values and your actions. And it's not just some feel-good concept. It has real-world implications.
Oh, absolutely. The source makes a really important point about this. It talks about how broken promises, they don't just exist in a vacuum. They impact our relationships, our work, our whole social fabric.
Think about it. When someone breaks a promise, what's the first thing that gets damaged?
Trust.
Right. And trust is like the glue that holds everything together.
And once that trust is broken, it can be so hard to rebuild. It's like a crack in a foundation. It might seem small at first, but it can weaken the whole structure over time.
Exactly. And it doesn't just impact our relationships with others, it also affects how we relate to ourselves. When we consistently break promises to ourselves, it chips away at our self-esteem, our sense of agency. We start to doubt our own ability to follow through, which can lead to a whole spiral of negative self-talk and self-sabotage.
So, okay, we've established that breaking promises is bad, but we've also acknowledged that we're human and we're going to mess up sometimes. So how do we find that balance? How do we become better promise keepers, even with all our flaws and limitations?
Well, the source suggests that it starts with recognizing that as followers of Christ, we're called to a higher standard, not in a legalistic, check all the boxes kind of way, but in a way that reflects God's character.
Okay, that makes sense in theory, but what does that actually look like in practice? Like, when I'm staring down a deadline I know I might not meet, how do I practically embody that higher standard?
It's about being intentional, both with our words and our actions. It's about pausing before we make a promise and asking ourselves, can I realistically keep this? And if the answer is no, or even I'm not sure, then maybe it's time to reevaluate.
It's about being honest with ourselves and with others. No more over-promising and under-delivering. It's about setting realistic expectations and then doing our absolute best to meet them.
Exactly. And the source gives us a beautifully simple yet profound guideline from Matthew 5.37. Let your yes be yes and your no be no.
It's so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of it all, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, we feel this pressure to say yes to everything and everyone, to overcommit, to spread ourselves thin. But this verse, this let your yes be yes and your no be no, it's like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that we actually have permission to say no.
It's almost radical, isn't it? In a world that often equates yes with success, with being a team player, with not missing out. But maybe, just maybe, the real power move is in reclaiming the word no, saying no to protect our time, our energy, our sanity, so that when we do say yes, it's a resounding, heartfelt, I'm fully in kind of yes.
It's about being intentional, right? Not letting our commitments just happen to us, but choosing them with care, making sure they align with our values, our priorities.
Because every yes is a promise, whether we realize it or not. And if we're not careful, we end up scattering promises like confetti without considering the weight they carry, the expectations we're setting, both for ourselves and for others.
It's like that whole under-promise and over-deliver philosophy. Maybe it's not about being flashy or saying yes to everything, but about being someone who's known for their integrity, someone whose word actually means something.
Because think about the people you trust most in your own life. Aren't they often the ones who are thoughtful with their commitments, who don't make promises lightly, who you know you can count on, even when things get tough?
Absolutely. And on a flip side, when someone's constantly over-promising and under-delivering, it erodes that trust little by little.
It creates this unspoken expectation of, well, they probably don't really mean it, and suddenly their words lose their power.
It's like that boy who cried wolf, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, no one believes him, even when it really matters.
Exactly. And the thing is, this whole let your yes be yes and your no be no, it's not just about our interactions with others, it's also about the promises we make to ourselves.
Oh man, that's a whole other layer, isn't it? How many times have we made promises to ourselves to eat healthier, to exercise more, to finally pursue that dream, only to break them at the first sign of difficulty?
It's easy to let ourselves off the hook, to justify those broken promises with excuses or rationalizations. But the truth is, those broken promises, they chip away at our self-worth, at our belief in our own ability to follow through.
So where do we even begin? How do we start to turn this whole promise-keeping thing around, both in our relationships with others and with ourselves?
The source reminds us that it's a process, a journey, not a destination. We're not going to become perfect promise keepers overnight, but we can start by being more mindful, more intentional, pausing before we say yes or no and asking ourselves, can I realistically keep this commitment? Is this in alignment with my values and priorities?
It's about being honest with ourselves, even when it's uncomfortable. And it's about giving ourselves grace when we mess up, because let's be real, we all do.
Yeah. We're human. We're going to stumble. But the important thing is that we keep getting back up, keep striving to align our actions with our words, to become people of integrity, both in the eyes of others and in our own eyes.
And maybe, just maybe, as we do that, we'll discover that true freedom, true fulfillment, doesn't come from saying yes to everything, but from the peace of mind that comes from knowing our word is our bond, that we can be trusted, both by others and by ourselves.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, a huge thank you to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the world of promises, covenants, and the weight of our words. It's been a fascinating journey, and we hope you'll continue the conversation with us. Until next time, remember, let your yes be yes and your no be no.